Hi everyone and welcome to today's video, which is my bullet journal setup for the month of February. Before we get into the setup though, I wanted to quickly flip through January and show you all what the spread ended up turning out like. So for January, I really enjoyed all of these spreads I had created. I found them very functional and very useful for me. There's a few things that I want to tweak and adjust to make them a little bit more useful and efficient for me, but overall, I really enjoyed all of the spreads I had created. My favorites were the habit tracker page and then the journaling page. I really enjoyed having those two sections and everything else as well. For my weeklies, I had seen a Instagram post by somebody that I cannot remember the name of, but I will link her in the description box. And she had uploaded a picture of a weekly very similar to this, so I had been dying to try it, so I finally decided to do it, and I actually really ended up enjoying the way that the weekly just worked overall. I found it very flexible in terms of my to-dos. I just created those as the days went. As you can see here, I was trying to show you that one of the pages was actually thicker than the other one, and that's because when I was creating my weekly for 1 week, I was not happy with how it was turning out, and I ended up sticking like 3 pages together because I just wasn't happy with it. But yeah, that is pretty much it for January. On the very end of the month, I put a review of January, which is basically a review of how the month ended up going. I don't know if I'm going to stick with that, but I will let you guys know in the next video. But anyways, let's move on to the setup for February. And for this month, I decided to go with a rose garden theme. I wanted something that was inspired by Valentine's Day and it had a soft romantic feel. So that's what I decided to go with. I am focusing more on drawing roses and nature type of doodles throughout the month. So for my cover page, I decided to go with a elf type of character with a back facing towards us, because I want all of my spreads in this bullet journal to have a fantasy element. So once I look back at the spreads, it has a sort of whimsical fantasy magical feel to everything. So that's why I added in a elf character. Um, Behind her is a garden of little ferns and roses and like other nature sort of doodles. I am going to, in a bit, write February, and that is just my handwriting, and I'm just making the downstrokes a little bit thicker so it looks like faux calligraphy. And then above her, I decided to go with some chains of like roses and ferns because I felt it looked a little bit empty. I actually don't really know what the leaf doodle is called. I'm just calling it a fern, but I don't actually think it is a fern. Anyways, the main color that I'm going to go with for this month is pink, and with little pops of green through the leaf designs that I will be incorporating. But yeah, I'm actually really happy with how the cover page ended up turning out. All of the materials that I use will be listed in the description box if you are curious to know what specific materials I used and colors and all that sort of stuff. So I'm now beginning the coloring process. There was one thing I wanted to mention and make sure I mentioned because I thought it might be useful for some of you guys. So on my Crayola Super Tip markers, when I had received them and when I was swatching them into the back of my journal, while I was swatching them, I put a number on the swatch and then I put that same number onto the barrel of the Super Tip marker. And you can see I was flipping back to the swatch page just because I wanted to double check the colors. But in the future, if I want to use a Crayola Super Tip marker, instead of having me find the color I want and then having to do several swatches to figure out which marker it is, I can just look at the color that I want, then look at the swatch number, and then just find that number on the barrel of my super tip markers, and it saves so much more time and energy and paper because you don't have to sit there and do swatches to figure out what color you want to use. So I thought that might be a helpful tip if you want to use that for your Crayola super tip markers, or if you have markers or like materials that don't have a number system on them and you want to create something like that. But yeah, so for my cover page, I wanted the coloring to be very simple and soft looking, so it wasn't too overwhelming. I wanted the page to look very delicate and soft in general, so for the dress, since it is such a large area, I went in with watercolor. The pen that I had used was the Muji black gel ink pen in the 0.25, so it's a very fine pen, but it isn't waterproof, so there was a little bit of bleeding with the watercolors placed over it, but it wasn't too bad or anything like that. But yeah, so this is what my cover page ended up turning out like. I'm really happy with the result of it. So let's move on to the rest of the setup. The next spread that I will be creating is my calendar spread, or my monthly overview, and it is basically a calendar view of the days of February. For this spread, I did do some tweaks to it. In January, the boxes were a lot larger, and I felt that it was a little bit too big. So for February, I wanted to make them a little bit smaller, small enough so it wasn't big and chunky looking, but it wasn't so small that I wasn't able to fit everything that I wanted to fit in. So that is basically what I did. I didn't really decrease them by a lot. I think it was 2 grid spaces. And yeah, on my sidebar, instead of doing monthly goals, I am switching it out to a expense tracker. Last month I didn't even use the goals section. I barely even touched it or went back to look at it. So I figured instead of having blank space there, I would try and find something else that might be more useful. So I figured maybe having a expense tracker might work a little bit better. So what I had done was actually spelt it wrong, and I realized it after I had written it down. So I made a watercolor swatch that I'm going to later stick on top of what I have written to cover up my spelling mistake. And then for the rest of the page, I am just decorating it with some leaf chain sort of things. I don't really know what this is called, but anyways, and then on the bottom I have a little garden scene again, so I'm really happy with how it ended up turning out. So that is basically it for my February overview, and I'm really happy with how it ended up turning out. So after that, the next spread that I am doing, or the next set of spreads that I'm doing, is my journaling area. And for this month, I decided to increase the amount of space allocated for each day by 2 lines. So each day has about 4 lines, and I have a bit more space to go more into detail about how my day went and just be able to write a little bit more down if I feel like it. So that is what I decided to do, and obviously because I've increased the space, there's an extra page that needs to go with it. On the bottom, I decided to make a little garden scene again, and then for my title, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I want to call it, but when I was writing in journal, I made the downstroke for J a little bit too thick. So I had a little bit of difficulty trying to fix that, but besides that, I'm really happy with how this one ended up turning out. For my journaling spreads, I don't want to over decorate the spreads or anything because I feel like it might end up being a little bit too cluttered. So I'm keeping them very simple. And then on the bottom of that, I just put down my highlights area, and at the end of the month, I'm going to fill that out with anything that stood out to me during February. So then on to the next spread, I am using this page as my brain dump area. For last month, I had a double page spread as my brain dump because I wasn't really too sure how I would use it or if I would use it, and if I did, how much space I would need. And I found that it might have been a little bit too much space. So for this month, I am trying out just one page dedicated to my brain dump section, and I'll see how this ends up going. I kept the design very simple and minimal because I know by the end of the month it might end up getting a bit cluttered and messy if I over decorate it, so I just wanted to keep it very simple. So that is what this spread ended up turning out like, and on to the next spread, which is my habit tracker. And for this one, I am keeping the layout very similar. I am just tweaking the spacing, and that is basically about it. So when I zoom in a little bit, you will see that I spaced out the divider lines between the categories on the actual tracker. So instead of it being too close together, when I fill it out as the month goes on, there is a slight space between each category, so it doesn't look like it's getting squished or anything like that. But yeah, all of these symbols are pretty much the same. I did switch the order of a few of them, and that is pretty much about it though. So I am doing the same thing like I mentioned with a little key at the bottom. I don't really know what to fill this area with, so for the time being I'm just going to do this until I feel like I need to add something down there. And then as decoration for this page, I just drew in a bunch of roses and just decorated that at the top. So yeah, that is basically it. Also, I don't think I mentioned, but the symbols are just habits I want to track. In the middle is my mood tracker, and then on the right side of the column is my sleep tracker. So that is what those are. And then on to the next page. This is going to be my quote page, and for this one I decided to go with the same girl that I had drawn on my cover page. I wanted to bring her into another spread that wasn't part of the cover page because I wanted to tie her in more with the theme and everything. So that is just a close-up version of her, and the quote that I decided to go with for this month is, "Just in case you have forgotten, you matter, you are loved, you are worthy, you are magical." And I just found this off of Google. I don't really know who said it or like where the source is from, but I felt that it matched really nicely with the theme of the month. And also, since February is associated as the month of love and self-care, I thought it would be a nice quote to carry with me throughout the month. I also wanted my quote page to be right next to my habit tracker and have those two spreads together, because I constantly go to my habit tracker page to fill it out, make sure it's up to date and everything. And because of that, I always see whatever spread is on the page next to it. So I wanted these two spreads to be together as a constant and daily reminder, and just to make sure it's constantly in my mind and at the back of my head. Even when I don't see it, it's sort of like ingrained because I'm constantly looking at it without really realizing it, that type of thing. But yeah, I had a lot of difficulty from this point onwards in terms of my handwriting. I did do this in one sitting, so I think I was maybe just getting tired, but I wasn't happy with my handwriting and how I had written the quote. I just wanted to have it as my normal handwriting, but I wasn't happy with it. So I decided to try and cover it with a piece of paper like I had done in my monthly, but I didn't like it because it looked really obvious. So I just decided to go right onto the paper and just write over the whiteout and see how that would work. I still wasn't happy with it. As you can see, I threw my pen down out of frustration, but I decided just to leave it because I didn't want to cover it again. And then after that, I felt like the page looked a little bit unfinished, so I decided to make a similar border to what I had created for my brain dump page. And so I drew a few roses on the bottom corner and then made that same border. And then after I had done that, I felt the page looked a lot more complete and everything, so I'm pretty happy with how this one ended up turning out. And yeah, so I have one more spread left that I wanted to create or begin to create, and that is my weekly spread. So for this spread, I am making something very similar to the January spread, or the same thing, but I am only creating the very basics of this spread because the way that I do this style of weekly is it gets added to it as the days progress. So each daily section I do on the very like morning, or as the day progresses I add to that to-do list, and then once it's night time and then I go on to the next day, then I'll repeat the same daily style again for that day, and then by the end of the week I'll have something that is similar to the weeklies that I shown you in January. So because of that, the spreads can end up looking a little bit different each week. But yeah, here I had gotten really frustrated with my hand lettering. I'm not the greatest at brush lettering with actual like brush pens, but I am working on it. But yeah, at this point I was really frustrated by that. Anyways, so we have reached the end of the video and the final flip through. So this is all of these spreads. I'm really happy with how everything ended up coming out, and just the whole spread in general and the theme as well. I did go in off camera and add in a few little bits and pieces, since it has been a few days since I did the actual setup itself. But besides that, everything is pretty much the same. Uh, Everything that I've used material wise will be listed in the description box if you are curious, so you can go ahead and check that out. And that's pretty much it actually. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have any questions regarding the bound notebook, or questions in general that you want me to answer in the next video, leave them in the comment section, because I don't really think the setup is going to change all that much for next month. So yeah, again, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I hope you all have a wonderful day or night, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!